Click on.
Alrighty then. All right, so let's get started. Nice to see everyone, and I want to thank the RTPS user group for having me here. As you see on the screen, title of this session is "Don't Be Me," unless you really want to. What I mean by that is don't make the mistakes that I did. How to avoid Azure surprises. Now, if you notice in the title, the dollar signs, I'm talking about how, as you're trying to learn Azure, how can we avoid those big hits to our Azure subscriptions? Does that make sense? So this session evolved from a session that I did for the Research Triangle user group in February, March. Right? That was how to learn Azure. It was Azure 101. It had a lot of basic Azure stuff, like what is this? What is a resource group? So I took a spin on that and said, all right, that's still on YouTube, so you guys can go watch that on YouTube. But I still think it's important to understand what we have access to and some of those tools that we can leverage to make sure that our Azure monthly bill comes in right where we want it, hopefully next to nothing. All right, does that make sense? All right, how many people here have an Azure account? Oh, almost everyone. Awesome, awesome. So when did you get your Azure accounts? When did you sign up, do you think?
2 years ago.
2 years ago? Okay. So I'm going to talk about what's some of the stuff that you have free and when you sign up, how long that's free for. So that's kind of, that's going to hopefully start the conversation of, well, what can we do beyond our free stuff? All right. Now, myself, as I said, my name is Michael Teske. I'm an author evangelist for Pluralsight, and I specify my focus is in Azure. That's exclusively what I've been doing. Now, I'm fortunate enough that I can learn Azure, all right? I'm learning and teaching at the same time and have my expenses mostly covered by Pluralsight. So if I run up an Azure spend bill, I'm not terribly concerned. I try to keep my costs down, but I usually have that covered by my company, right? Because we need to make the courses. Now, I've been an instructor for 17 years in a 2-year community college, pretty much focusing on IT infrastructure, specifically in the Microsoft space, all right? And I started towards the end dealing a lot with automation, PowerShell, and I was just starting up a cloud program at the college, and then I got plucked by Pluralsight, okay? So that's kind of my background. So in this session, what I want to talk about is we have to actually feel the pain to understand what we're going to deal with here. All right, so when you get that monthly email and you see you have to go to the Azure portal and look at your invoices, it can get kind of daunting, right? Even though myself, it's covered, but at the end of the day, as a good employee, I want to keep those costs down as much as possible, right? I mean, I don't want to be running up Azure costs just because I'm not paying for it. That's not a really good employee mentality. Then we're going to talk about the free for now. Now, everyone's got an Azure account. We were having conversations last night about, well, what happens after that Azure account free stuff expires? Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Some factoids about where you'll see the most cost come into play. And then where we can get our hands on this is the tools and methods to apply right now. There's certain practices that you need to be doing right now, even before now. All right, and hopefully some of you already know some of this stuff. But there's a couple things that I'm going to do. I'm not going to come up here and say, I just wrote this elaborate PowerShell script. That's not me, all right? Dave, I thought I heard your sessions about using modules, right? That was last night you talked about that. I'm using tools that already exist in the wild, right? Tools that are already created. I have a PowerShell workflow from Tim Warner, all right? And I'm going to apply that in this session, show you how that runs and what the purpose of that is. All right, the other tools are other things that I found online and things that I want to ultimately get to at the end of the day, right? So the biggest thing that we'll talk about is don't do default. Azure doesn't do default really well. Azure likes to make you spend money by doing default, right? You'll find out when you do default, it's not taking the free tiers really pretty much ever. Okay, you see that both in deploying VMs in Azure and the UI, as well as PowerShell. Then I'm going to talk about Azure Policy. How many people know what Azure Policy is? Okay, good. About half of you. It's a little bit. So that's a nice little tool that I'll show you how to leverage. I've discovered this tool when I did my Azure security courses. Right, so that's something that we'll get into. Very simple, right? Nothing real too elaborate, but something that could save you, a significant amount of Azure spend. And then circling back to turning things off the right way. Okay, there's things that we can do in Azure to make sure that when we turn it off, it's off, and the bill's still not running, all right? And then this seems kind of innocuous, but resource groups. We can leverage resource groups to make sure that we aren't getting charged, okay? In a couple different ways, all right? All right, so I'm a kid of the 80s, all right? I grew up in the 80s, Rocky was my bag, all right? And this was always one of my favorite things, you know. What's your prediction? Pain, right? So here's my pain. That's basically every month I get this. And like I said, I don't know if it's just me, but I get really anxious when it comes to expenses that I have to submit, either to my wife or to Concur, right? How many people like Concur? Awesome, nobody. But I click on this, and this is what I feel like, all right? I'm petrified. I don't know why that is, all right? It's some post-traumatic something I have with doing expenses. I never like doing expenses. And when I submit my expenses, my boss is like, oh yeah, cool. Yeah, expense everything, right? Yeah, including the drinks. I'm like, sweet. So this is what my list of expenses look like, right? Anything stick out there? Ouch. Yeah, that 500, that didn't feel so good. Now, that was a legitimate expense. That was a course construction expense. Now, there were things during that course construction that I could have done differently that would have brought that down a little bit. So, what I had to do, so just kind of give you the how the sausage is made at Pluralsight, is as a full-time author, what I do is I'm in the Azure partnership. So we partner with Microsoft. We produce courses that go up on Microsoft's site that link back to the course in our site. They're free. They're in front of the paywall, right? So I get these domain objectives from Microsoft that include job task analysis, right? And one of the modules in this course, one of the objectives was to migrate a SQL database, on-prem SQL database, up into Azure database, right? How many people have dealt with SMEs? All right, couple? Yeah, they're fun. The SME said, no, let's do it into an Azure managed instance, all right? If you've ever dealt with managed instances or heard of managed instances, they're interesting, all right? That's a whole ball of wax, different ball of wax, all right? So this is at the Azure Calculator site, and if we see down here, that's the base entry level of a SQL managed instance, 800 and some bucks a month. Now that's if you don't have a SQL license. If you have the hybrid benefit, which means you have some software assurance licensing, then it drops down to a reasonable 530 some bucks a month. All right, so I had to run this instance with, and I had just a hello world database. It was a little small database, and I had to run this till the course actually published. Because when they come back with feedback and you have to make changes, I'm not going to rebuild this entire environment. All right, yes, I can automate that stuff. This stuff isn't quite, I'm not at the skill level to do that yet, right? So yeah, it's kind of a bear. Did you have your hand up? Did you have your hand up? Okay, if you have questions, just stop me anytime, all right? So that was, a cost. I expected that. And when I went through and created that managed instance, I looked at the price, I'm like, are you kidding me? This is what it costs? And I'm like, oh well, all right, that's what they want. So this was my spend. This is an Azure cost analysis. So if you go into your cost settings, your subscription settings, you can pick that invoice and then select cost analysis, and you get pretty colors, right? But this is a really nice graphic that shows us where we're spending our money. And if you see on my service name, probably 3/4 of it, 3/4 of my Azure spend is managed instances. It's SQL databases, right? Can't do nothing about that. Microsoft wanted that in their course. I can't, it is what it is, right? But what happens when Mike doesn't know what he's doing in Azure? Which is most every day, okay? Azure is huge, by the way. There's a lot of stuff in Azure, right? I kind of sit in the IT ops and security side of Azure, right? I'm learning all this stuff because it changes every day, all right? So here, whoops. Oh, I didn't have that, right? Not hitting my buttons right. Oh, this one isn't the one that circles. Now, This one right here, this service name, it says VPN Gateway. All right, 128 bucks. Don't do default. I clicked, the click next to admin. Yeah, right here. I did default. I did not realize that there were different SKUs or tiers for the VPN Gateway. I'm thinking, what's a VPN Gateway, right? And I basically set it at the standard VPN setting, which this was a monthly spend for me. And I didn't have a lot of traffic. There wasn't a lot of traffic going back and forth, right? They had a basic tier that I didn't know of. I did figure it out, right, after the second time around when I started doing my security courses, and I had to set up a VPN gateway between on-prem and up in Azure. It cut that cost in half, all right? So that's the one thing I want you to take away. When you're starting to play around in Azure is don't settle for the defaults. Look into the stuff. If it says tier, if it says SKU, all right, dive into that and see if you can get it to a more reasonable cost, all right? Unfortunately, if you're out of your Azure free stuff and you don't want to reboot a new credit card and a new Microsoft account, you might have to spend some of this stuff. But there's other alternatives, okay? So that was my VPN gateway. Now this one makes me sad, all right? 173 bucks. Now, the funny part about this is this was based off of, what I did is I told you I did that Learn Azure 101 Without Breaking the Bank session for the user group here back in February, March. And the whole premise was don't spend money, right? Try to save money. Don't leave things up and running. Well, I went through that and I went through some of the basic PowerShell or some of the basic Azure things. We did some stuff, live demo stuff. And one of the things was I set up a web app, a WordPress web app with a MySQL backend. Okay. Now, how many people here have spun things up like that in Azure? And it happens instantaneously, right? Not so much. Some of those deployments can take up to 20 minutes. Okay. How fun is that in a webinar when you're watching something deploy for 20 minutes? Okay. So what do we do in that scenario? We do cooking show instruction, right? Who's that? Martha Stewart, I guess I'll call her. She's making all the stuff, and then she pulls out, here's the already made stuff. And that's what I did. It was more so that as well as a backup, right? Because everything works perfectly when you do a demo, right? Yeah, I just jinxed myself. So the live demo went very quick. And it came up and boom, there we were. And I'm like, hey, yeah, rock star. And so then what we did is I showed, okay, this is how we reduce our costs. We removed this. I had a completely separate WordPress site running. Guess who forgot to tear down the backup WordPress site for a month? Boom, 173. Guess who paid for that? Not pluralsight. My wife told me, she's like, well, we can just run that through pluralsight, right? And I'm Mr., like I said, I hate doing expenses because I'm like, can I really expense this? I was there, I bought it, right? And I said, no, this was on me. This was my stupidity. I was doing this for my own professional development. And would they have paid for it? Absolutely. They're an awesome company, okay? But this was out of my pocket, right? And I'll say my wife was not terribly happy with me. And that's what basically we looked at. Not we were broke, but that's what it felt like, right? It's basically, I got nothing out of that, but I did have a great experience, and I learned a lot about it, okay? Now, I learned a lot over the last year in Azure, and this is what I'm trying to relay to you. Check out those numbers. Now, if I'm learning Azure and I get that stuff, I'm done learning Azure, right? But this is actually legitimate numbers from when I was creating the security role courses. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that can come in there. Now, I'm not creating these big elaborate environments. So, check this out. This is where I had that thing circled. Azure DDoS protection. All right? I was like floored by this. This is a month of operation on my small environment. Does anybody know what Azure DDoS is? Yeah, it's their service that basically protects you from a distributed denial of service. And it's not very cheap, I found out. Okay? Now, again, if I'm an enterprise company, it's going to be a lot bigger than this, right? My DDoS is protecting a small environment of probably 8 virtual machines in the cloud as well as my on-prem stuff. Okay? But still, 1 month of that small environment, and if they don't have an Azure DDoS They do have a free, and then it's standard. They don't have a premium tier. This is just standard tier. It's nice. It's a great service. It spins up Azure Log Analytics. It does a lot of that stuff. And when you see that stuff, you're going to get charged, right? Whenever you hear Log Analytics, just think cha-ching, okay? It's always going to hit your Azure spend. Anything written to Azure and storage, for the most part, is going to do a little cha-ching, okay? So yeah, this DDoS was a big spend for me. I had some other things in there, application gateway, just some minor stuff. But yeah, that was a big part of that course creation. And again, I have to keep these services running because until they're signed off and actually published in our catalog, published up on Microsoft, I may have to change something last minute. All right?
So there is no stand.
What's that?
Is there anything below standard on that?
They do have a free tier. Yeah, they have Azure DDoS is, if you have an account, it's running, right? From a free perspective. I don't know the elevation, like the big differences between the free. I had that in my course, but I have a very bad retention, okay? But yeah, there's significant differences on how it logs everything. Like Azure regular DDoS doesn't log anything, all right? So if you try to fail and succeed, which have you done? I love George Carlin, makes you think. So yes, did I fail? Was it a cataclysmic failure? No. I've heard stories, right? I belong to a cloud user group in Northeast Wisconsin. I'm from Green Bay, Wisconsin, by the way. Just to give you a little context of, what's that?
Go Packers.
Right on. That's why I'm leaving early tomorrow, because I want to watch the Packer game. Somebody ran up, I thought it was a 15,000 or a 50,000 Azure spend. Not personal, right? It was at a company. But can you imagine walking into your boss's office with that? Yeah, I don't think that guy's working there anymore. But one of the guys, Mike Nelson, who works for Rubrik, told us about that story, and he does the circuit with VMware and whatnot. And he was talking about how their Azure spend, somebody made a whoopsie, and that's a pretty expensive whoopsie. So yes, I made some failures. They're kind of small failures. I learned. So in my Azure security courses, I brought my cost down. I knew that a VPN gateway has a basic SKU, right? A smaller tier, a cheaper tier. And for my purposes, I don't need big bandwidth, right? I have small environment. I'm setting up a course, okay? So I can get away with having that smaller bandwidth. So what do we have free? So free for now, when you first sign up, you get a $200 credit towards all your Azure or all your Azure services. Now, that may seem, well, maybe it doesn't seem like a lot after my last couple of slides, but you can get that, you can stretch that to go a long way. Now, a lot of us said we already have an Azure account, right? Now, I think, Dave, we were talking about that with the credit card. If you change your credit card, do you get that new, like if I did a new Microsoft account, I would probably have to use a different credit card. Maybe it was, Bossman said that. So there are ways to buck the system. Yeah, and Dave, you said you got the temporary credit card, like the burner card?
Yeah, one of my partners did that.
Yeah, so there's ways you can buck the system. Yes, you're going to lose the assets that you've already created, but who cares? You're learning stuff, right? So you can go through and get one of those temporary credit cards or those limited credit cards and keep on creating different accounts, right? That's one way to learn Azure, and that gives you your $200 credit. Now, for a month or for 12 months, you get a bunch of other stuff, okay? Now, if you go to Azure's website and go to the portal, log into the portal, and just search for free services, and we'll see this in a moment, it'll show you all the different free services you have access to. And you can deploy from that site, right, within the portal. So if I want to create a free VM, I can just click create, and it'll do that right there. So now you know you're baked into the free process versus you going out and creating that virtual machine and not knowing exactly what was that SKU, what was that pricing tier. All right, so there's different things that you can do to kind of prevent yourself from actually creating those things that are going to cost money. Then there's always free. So you're always going to have Active Directory for free, Azure DevOps, automation, virtual networks, a whole bunch of stuff. Now, why is this important? If you can't really do a whole lot with it, why do we care? I mean, is Azure Virtual Networks, is that something you might need to leverage at some point in time? Yeah, you can go there. You can PowerShell that, see what it means to set up a subnet. Right? All that stuff is valuable information. If I can tap into that, great. Azure Functions, right? How many people here are familiar with Azure Functions, right? I know it's a big PowerShell thing now. That's another thing that is free. Now, some of these always free do have caps on it. right? Like one of the caps was 10,000 transactions or something to that effect. 10,000 functions or whatever, I don't know. If I'm doing that a month, I have other issues, okay? Now, beyond free, get to know your Azure Service Calculator. Forget what that thing's gonna cost you. And as I said, once we get beyond our free, get that, tapped out, or that credit card, that $100 credit card, sign up with that, create a new account. All right, and you can keep on rolling that over and do that same game. Now, I believe Amazon and Google are pretty much in the same space as far as what they offer for free as well, and for the duration. Okay, so if you're an Amazon person, a GCP person, any Oracle people in here? No, good, we can talk about them. Or whatever cloud platform, they do have similar services and similar offerings. So it's good to kind of get at least a fundamental understanding of those other services as well. Because if you're looking for a new role and you can talk the talk, I mean, that's going to get you a lot further. How many people here have gone into Amazon Web Services? It's a little different, isn't it? Very different, all right? The vocabulary they use is interesting, to say the least. So here I'm in the portal, and this is part of the free services. So if you look for free services, it'll bring you up all the different things that are free, okay? Now, it gives you the SKU as well, so you're not going to make a mistake there. Again, this is if we're doing this in the portal. Now, if you're doing this via PowerShell, no. You got to put in the size when you're doing a PowerShell command. Your PowerShell, new AZ VM, you have to make sure you tell it it's a standard B1S. I think the default is a standard A1S. I think it's an A series, which is going to cost some money, all right? Cost factoids. The region, location, and geography matters. Anybody know why? What's that?
Availability.
Availability?
Yeah, the grid.
Grid. What's interesting is a lot of the things is just cost of doing business in that region. That's why things are always scaling different in different regions. I know I do a lot in central US because that's where I live, and I want everything as close to me as possible for the latency purposes. But East US and East US too, I don't know which one is more expensive. I keep forgetting which one it is, but it's a pretty significant difference. So when you're scaling your stuff, when you're creating your VMs, and if it's gonna cost some money, understand the locations are gonna impact what you're gonna spend, all right? Price of doing business, could be taxes, could be your carbon footprint. There's all different things that factor into that price difference, right? They're gonna have different price points, whether it's here in the US or even globally. So that's why those prices change, because the price of doing business in those regions is different, all right? Some SKUs may not be available in the region you want too, all right? Somebody said availability, right? I'm looking at SKU availability. What size VMs, right? The smaller VMs, I think, scale across all the regions. You're gonna see those pretty much everywhere. Now, this has been a kind of a big hot topic, reserved instances. How many people have heard of that? Okay, what's a reserved instance?
You buy the VM size for a year, 2 years, or 3 years,
Mhm.
and you pay the cost up front. And
Awesome.
you get that VM size for that amount of time.
Yep.
So you can tear it down and make another one, tear it down and make another one, as long as you don't buy out of the number of VM sizes that you paid for, prepaid for.
Excellent, awesome. Is this new?
I think it's been around like, what, a year and a half, 2 years, something like that.
Yeah, they've been around ever since I've been doing Azure stuff, because I know when I do my Azure migration series, we do assessments, and the assessment tells you what your projected operational expenditure is going to be once you're in the cloud after migration. And part of that, the properties that you can set to calculate is reserved instances. And as it says here, 72%, right? That's right off the bat, right? Now that doesn't include, that includes server licensing as well. Now, if you do a hybrid benefit, it's up to 82%, all right? So now think about that when you're doing your own stuff, when you're doing this for your self-learn. If you think you're gonna be in Azure for 3 years, maybe it might be worth looking at. I'm not saying go ahead and do it, but that's something to consider, because now they have monthly payment plans. That's what's new with reserved instances, right? What's that?
What is hybrid?
Oh, great question. Hybrid benefit. So hybrid benefit is essentially if you have a software assurance license, meaning you buy your licensing, your server licensing through a vendor or a vendor partner with Microsoft, and like say for instance, I have server whatever version right now, 2019. I have to pay a monthly subscription or whatever a whole year, and I keep on getting those software licenses. That's probably a really horrible explanation of it. One of the places that I work at, we have 3 CALs that we have software assurance. We just pay Software One is our vendor, and that counts towards this.
It doesn't matter where you run the VM. It can be on-prem or
Yes, yeah.
That's the hybrid.
The hybrid means you can run it on-prem or in the cloud. So I burned up I just did a Hyper-V deployment. I didn't do a migration. I should have done a migration. But so I used up all of my SKUs, all my licenses. Good question though. Other cost factoids, compute is always going to be the most expensive part. The processing power, I think they call it the DCU, I think it is. DTU, digital transaction, I think it is. Either way, the size of the process or the amount of processing that you do in Azure is where you're going to find the most hit on your Azure spend. Networking is second. Now within Azure, and I'm going to make an assumption with some of the other cloud providers, ingress is free. Meaning inbound traffic is free. Outbound is where you're going to get dinged with the transactions. And then storage is third. Now, I'm saying starting with premium. Again, premium's not the bottom. Standard spinny disks are the bottom. But whenever you see premium SSD, and they have, I think, ultimate SSD, yeah, stay away from those. They're going to cost a lot of money. Yes, sir?
Managed disk is another big one with your storage costs that drives the cost.
Yes. Managed disk versus non-managed, right? Do you know the value of managed disks?
So, I mean, the value is really around the recovery and protection against data loss.
Mhm.
So, but it's, for you, if you're just trying to keep your costs down, using the spin disk are the best kind of way to keep that spin down. But if you do have to do it, be aware some of the SKUs you're selecting when you default is managed. And I've made that mistake before where you get the bill at the end of the month, you're like, well, no, that's not what the calculator said. And I selected that.
Yeah. Oh, in my security courses, I could have done things differently there too, because I did have managed disks that were probably scaled a little bit more than they needed to be. If I were doing that on my own, I'd button that down quite a bit. Another benefit of managed disks is that they're scalable. They can scale up and down a lot more easier. You can do that with non-managed disks from what I've read, but it's very difficult, right? But yeah, great feedback. So that's another thing to consider. Now I've heard rumors that they're going to be deprecating unmanaged disks. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but that may be something to think about as well. So tools, we're going to look at Azure Policy, resource groups, and then we're going to look at automation. All right, now I hope I can get into all of this. All right, like I said, I'm grabbing tools that I found out in the wild, and I'm using these, and I want to, my end game, I didn't have a lot of time to prep for this. If I had more time, what I wanted to do is actually incorporate this into my own little logic factor, right? My own little PowerShell script to get this stuff done. How are we doing on time? All right, so we should all be familiar with this command. All right, this is some of the methods that we need to apply. So when we're running Azure VMs, all right, and we want to shut those down, this is what we need to use. Because if I use shutdown, I select Azure VM, I'm grabbing my resource group name, RTPSUG-Saturday, and I pipe it over to stop VM. The critical thing here is -force. All right? So when you're using PowerShell, -force is always going to be your friend in the cloud. So what it does, as it says right here, is it deallocates the VM. It doesn't delete the VM, right? That'd be useless, right? You can do that. You can do that and do a remove VM. But it puts it in a deallocated state, which releases the resources. So one of those resources is the public IP address. So if you're spinning up virtual machines and you add a public IP address, that's going to cost a little bit of money, right? You can do that without a public IP. But when you deallocate it, it shuts it into a quiet state and it releases those resources. If you have data on disk for that VM, you're still going to get storage costs. Right? But the deallocation basically says, all right, we're not charging you for processing power on this system. Okay? Now, if you don't use the force, it'll show up in your VM, or it'll show up in the portal, is just stopped. All right. What we want to see is we want to see this right here. Stop with deallocated. Okay. Now, other ways that you can deallocate it is you can simply select stop in the portal. So up here, we have stop. So you can select that in the portal. Now, if you're within the VM, say you remoted into it, and you click and you select shutdown, that's not going to deallocate it. All right. So those things add up. I mean, if you have that VM that's sitting there and it's not deallocated, it's going to cost money. All right. So that's one of the methods that you can start using right away is always think -4s or go into the portal and click stop. So what if you're out and about? All right. I'm here in lovely North Carolina. I love it here. And I'm like, holy crap, I got VMs up and running. All right. This is going to cost me money. Right. Has anyone kicked the tires on the Azure Mobile App? Yeah, it's awesome. I was playing with this. This is actually at dinner with my wife, and I'm paying attention to her, obviously. And I show her, I'm like, oh, look at this. This is so super cool. And she's just, typical. How many people get, their spouses roll their eyes at them when you talk tech? Yeah, that's my wife too. So if I'm out and about, I can go out there and I can shut those things down. Okay. Now again, this is a manual process, right? And we're here for PowerShell, and PowerShell is all about what? Automation, right? So I could still do this. I could set something up in my Azure storage and run a script, right? Or I could do what? Flush it out with a runbook, possibly. I could do that. Okay, an automation runbook. Or I can have a scheduled task. All types of options are available to us, right? Well, actually, I want to show you something. Check out my battery game. I'm proud of that. 100%. Does anybody get PTSD when they see, or get stressed out when they see people that are on red line batteries? My son lives there. It stresses me the F out, okay? Now, I had a fun travel day yesterday, so I thought I'm going to go into the Azure cloud. I'm sitting in Green Bay for 4 hours, 10 miles from my house, stuck at the gate because of fog. So I'm like, well, I'm going to take a screenshot. And so I went out and I did get Azure VM, and just to say, well, yep, there are my VMs. All my VMs are live and kicking for this Azure Saturday, or PowerShell Saturday. So Azure, the Azure module is pretty cool. I like playing around with that. But this mobile app is really fun. My battery was at 78. That's the time when I pull out my battery, my portable charger, and I start plugging it in. I'm not kidding you. It's in my bag somewhere. So I have a threshold that I get really freaked out about. All right. Now, some other tools that you can use. This is in the marketplace. This is going to cost money. So if we look at this, it says automation, log analytics, and monitor. Whenever you see those three together, it's going to cost you some money, right? But for your peace of mind, you can actually use this. It's essentially doing an automation account in the background, right? And they're charging for it, but you're getting log analytics, okay? So that's in the marketplace. It says you will be charged based on the pricing of the services above, all right? All right, so now it's demo time. So what this demo is it's a demo, okay? You don't want to spoil the fun. So let's escape out of here. Let's minimize 1D. All right, so what I have here, and I just want to get a level check. Are we all good with this? Can we see this? Is the coloring okay? A little bigger? Come on. Bigger, right? All right, so what I have here is this is just my demo script over here. Actually, this one is it. So these are just commands I put together. Connect AZ account, that's going to register this device with Azure. Okay, has anyone done that with the AZ module? It's pretty fun, and it's a lot different than it was before with the AZRM. This actually is a persistent connection to Azure. Now, how many people are security people in here? That's probably not a good thing, is it? Yeah. But if how many people are lazy in here? I am, right? It's a good thing. I don't have to log in every single gold darn time. Excuse me. All right. Now, another thing that I like to check out is what SKUs do I have in my location? All right, so this is my location of central US. So if I get the AZ VM size, I can see everything that's available to me. All right, so I hit F8. And let me pull this up. So it gives me a listing of all the different standards. Now, one of the less expensive ones, so there's B1S, this is the free one. I think B1MS is another really inexpensive one. There's, I think it's B1MS is like $10 a month to run. That's not too bad. Now again, multiply that times the number of VMs you have though too. Okay, if you're just playing around, and this is what I like to do, is I like to have a VM up and running, and then I can hit it with my PowerShell, just to play around and get my PowerShell AZ module chops going. Okay, I mean that's how we learn stuff, right? All right, so we got that going for us, which is nice. Now down here, what I'm going to do, has anyone created an Azure VM with PowerShell? Yes? Okay. This is just basically, I'm going through and I'm creating an Azure VM. Let's pull this down. Anybody know what this technique is called? Splatting. Good, cool. So all this is doing is I'm splatting, I'm creating an array, a hash table, if you will, of the parameters and the values. All right? So I'm doing resource group name. So I have a demo RG. I have 2 different resource groups I'm going to deal with here. I have a couple different things intentionally so I can show you at the end of the day what we're doing here. So we have all the information here. It should be pretty much self-explanatory. These are all parameters for the new AZM commandlet. All right? So I'm going to put that in my hash. Hit F8. So everything's stored. Then what I do is I go down to my create demo, and I hit F8 again. Now down here it's asking for my username. Yes, I could have automated that. Nothing better than typing in passwords. Quick level check. How many characters does Azure require for passwords?
12.
What's that?
Is it 12?
Yes, awesome, 12. All right, did everything just go away? Oh. So theoretically, that should go out and create my VM. But usually what you see is down here, it says PowerShell and it does a spinny thing, right? So what I can do is I can go over and check in the portal. Go to VMs. And it must not have hit F8. This is what I'm talking about when you say you jinx yourself.
No, it's going.
It's running now at the bottom.
Oh, thank you.
2 for twice the price.
We are going to have 2. All right. So while that goes and does its thing, I'm going to just make sure. Oh, if it doesn't create, we'll figure something out. So what I was trying to get to display here is just creating a virtual machine in a separate resource group. All right, that's going to come back. We'll see that how that's different than what we're going to be doing in a moment through the use of Azure Policies. So through Azure Policies, what I can do is I can say, you know what? Don't let Teske create a virtual machine that is this SKU, or better yet, only allow these versions. Okay, so even though I work by myself, I'm not managed by anybody, probably not a bad thing for me because you know what, oftentimes I'm forgetful or I want to get shit done really fast. Okay, so I'll go through and I'll whip through something, I'll forget to put the right SKU in, or I'll just be that click next admin. What I can do is I can handcuff myself to make sure that I only use the low cost SKUs, right? And that's done through Azure Policy. Now, Azure Policy lives out in the portal, but we're going to do some PowerShell stuff with it. So I go here, look at policy, grab Azure Policy. How many people here know what group policies are? Sure. Yeah, that's what I thought with Azure Policy. I'm not going to say that's what they are, but what it does, this is more for compliance, right? And also keeping, you know, your intern from spinning up a Minecraft server, you know, one of the big, large, high CPU and GPU VMs that cost thousands of dollars a month. So what this does is it basically goes, and as you see right here, I have this one called allowed VMs. So these are a list of VMs that I've allowed myself to create for a particular resource group. So if I looked at this, if I can spin this back. So I have the resource triangle PowerShell user group. I'm restricting that group from only creating 3 different types of VMs. And I can see that, actually let me do this. By going to that thing, allowed Azure VMs, I have one non-compliant, right? Now, what this means is that I created this before I created the policy. Now the policy comes in and says, hey, Teske, you got one that's non-compliant, fix it. Doesn't delete it, right? That'd be bad. But at least alerts me of things that are not compliant in my organization. I can do this at the subscription level, management group level, and at tenant level, all right? And there's a whole lot more to Azure Policies than just restricting SKUs, all right? So if I view the definition, it's your standard JSON file. How many people here are really good at JSON? No. How many people here are good at copy-paste? Dope. So am I. So what I did is I copy-pasted this JSON file. Now, I believe it was Ian Folds. All right, like I said, I'm grabbing tools from off the interweb. Okay, Ian Folds, who wrote Learn Azure in a month of lunches. I think he lives out in Seattle, or I know he's in the Northwest because he always tweets at me with a picture of his grill buried in snow this high. But he had a really cool article about how to do this in PowerShell, and that's where I got this from. Because I did this for my security courses, right? I went through the portal because they want portal stuff, which kind of bugs me a little bit. But I always throw a little PowerShell in there just to be cool. So I went out there and I got this and went through his step-by-step, and it worked great, right? There's a lot of stuff on the Azure doc sites too that walks you through some of the stuff, and they give you the portal option, the PowerShell option, and the Azure CLI option, all right? We're not doing good on time. So that's what that is doing there. That's the policy definition. So now, if I get into my VS Code, this is basically walking it through. And I'm not going to go through and create all these because I've already created it. What I'm going to do is make this available in the repo, right? You guys have the repo set up that we're going to put this stuff in?
Everything's in there yet.
Yeah, but this will all be available out there. So it just walks through, and I put comments in there on how you can do it at the, right here is assign custom policy at the resource group level, or assigning it at the subscription level. So here, if I scroll over, my scope is subscriptions. Okay? No. So here I'm going to do this again, but notice what's my resource group name? I'm going to create a new VM. Resource group name is RTPSUG Saturday. Hit F8 on this. And hopefully this one runs, because this will tell us what. This one better work this time. Oh, you're kidding me. Nope. It worked. That was fast. Usually it churns for a while, and then Azure. I mean, gotta love Azure. Demo 4 was disallowed by policy. That's pretty much what I wanted you to see, right? The first one should have run because it was in a different resource group. I did not apply that Azure policy to that resource group, so it can create whatever it wants. But I can drill down and create a resource group and basically snipe a policy at that single resource group or user. All right, so that's what's really cool with Azure Policy. If you go into Azure Policy, there's a ton of definitions in there that are beyond what I did here. I created a custom resource or custom definition, but there's tons of things out there. They have storage account sizes. They have different things for auditing. The Microsoft Management Agent, if it's not there present on your virtual machine, install it. And that works for both on-prem as well as Azure resources. All right, cool? Yeah, keeps you from building those big systems. All right, finally, I'm going to get right to the full definition of this. So there's a get help Azure VM, and what I like to know is how are my systems? Where are my systems? as far as are they running or not. This is really bugging me. So if we look at one of the parameters here, we have a status. What the hell are you doing? My touch mouse is being a little finicky. So as we see here, we have these statuses, right? There's a parameter on the get VM that's called status, if I can ever get there. There we go. So it indicates that the commandlet gets only the instance view of the virtual machine. So this is going to tell me whether or not my VM is running. Right? When you do a get VM, and I was going to go through and get member and go through all that stuff, but we're running short on time, I want to know if my VM is running. And if it's running, what should I do? Shut it down, right? So that's my end game, hopefully for the next session, for the next discussion I have, is that taking what I'm learning and finding the status, then shutting it down in a simple PowerShell script that I can run anywhere, right? So as I go through this, so I have that command right here. I'm looking at the resource triangle user group, hit F8, storing it in the VM state, hit F8 again. So it grabs all my systems. And if you can see on here, it tells me which ones are running, right? Status is level, info running, right? I can drill down on that a little bit more. So now I can hit display status up there, and it's going to tell me what it is. Now I can take that information, if that thing's running, now I can do some logic and say if it's running, shut it down. Or if it's this time of day, shut it down. Okay? Now there is a script in here. Again, this is a Tim Warner. Tim Warner collaborated with John Saville. But here's a function, get AZ VM status. So this is doing a lot of the stuff that I want to do. All right, check the status. And then what I want to basically buckle onto it or bolt onto it, if this is doing something, shut it down or start it up. All right? So I already loaded that one. Okay, where am I? I don't do well with touch mice, if you couldn't tell. I brought the wrong mouse. I had a Microsoft with a dongle. I have one USB port on here. So now if I type get VM that's where I ran this. Sorry, folks. Fade that guy. Was it VM status or? Yay. Full disclosure, this is my first session I've ever done. So a little nervous, but
You're doing fine.
so that's going to run. So while that's thinking about what it's doing, there it's coming back with the VMs that are up and running. And it could be running or not running. And what it'll display, it'll be shut down, deallocated, or stopped deallocated, or just stopped as well. So it's going to show us the true status or state of that system. Some of my portals get shut down. So now what I want to do is, based on that information, I'm going to show you really quickly a runbook. Now this is something that Tim Warner put together. Again, like I said, I'm taking these tools, things that are already existing, I'm not reinventing the wheel. Okay? What I want to do is, like I said, I want to make mine a little bit more simpler. Tim's got a workflow here. It's called Start, Stop VMs. How many people here have heard about the PowerShell conference book? This is in the PowerShell conference book. Go out and get it. So essentially this has a bunch of VMs in it. or a bunch of code in it, and it's a PowerShell workflow. So you see up there it says workflow. So that's a little different animal. It's a little more robust. I think Tim described it in Tim's way of it's more elegant. It's code. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if elegant code. I know people. There's different factions of people who code differently. What this does is it's going through. It's connecting to my Azure Automation account.